Today's Pasture Project webinar will be presented by Dr. Alan Williams, a core team member of the Pasture Project, a sixth-generation farmer, and a cover crop and intensive grazing expert. Dr. Williams will introduce the foundational principles of cover crop livestock integration, how to implement adaptive grazing practices using temporary fencing technology, real-life farm case studies showing results of cover crop livestock impact, soil health and ecosystem benefits, and a new biological soil testing analytical method. So my name is Jeff Farbman. Megan and I are going to do a quick introduction about the hosts of the webinar, and then Alan will dig right in. The Wallace Center, a business unit of Winrock International, is the co-host of this webinar. The Wallace Center has been a leading organization in the movement for a more sustainable and equitable food system for over 30 years. The Wallace Center supports entrepreneurs and communities as they build a new 21st century food system that is healthier for people, the environment, and the economy. An affiliate program of the Wallace Center at Winrock International, the Pasture Project is a movement of farmers and farmland supporters helping land managers reintegrate livestock rotation in the heart of upper Midwest farming. The initiative is designed to investigate and pilot solutions to water and soil quality issues in the upper Mississippi River watershed. One promising solution is our work with row crop farmers. With support from a Conservation Innovation Grant from the Natural Resources Conservation Service Division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we are working with row crop farmers to integrate multi-species cover cropping and adaptive rotational grazing to their land. We have partnered with 3 organizations in the Midwest: Sustainable Farming Association, Land Stewardship Project, and Practical Farmers of Iowa to help lead these efforts on the ground. This webinar is being presented in conjunction with Practical Farmers of Iowa. So let me introduce our moderator for today, Megan Filbert. Megan is the livestock coordinator at Practical Farmers of Iowa. She works with farmers to conduct on-farm research trials, plans field days, and livestock programs that focus on grass-based livestock production, grazing, cover crops, and water quality. Megan, can you say a few words about PFI?
Yes, I can, Jeff. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I would like to, for those of you who are not familiar, I'd like to introduce the concept of Practical Farmers of Iowa. So we are a nonprofit organization based in Ames, Iowa, and we were founded in 1985. We are a farmer-led, member-driven nonprofit. And we really were started by a group of farmers who wanted to conduct on-farm research experiments on their own farms to answer their own questions. So our mission is to strengthen farms and communities through farmer-led investigation and through information sharing. We do this through a whole series of events such as spring and summer field days, an annual conference, and a series of farminars, which is what we call webinars. And really, we welcome everyone. We have a very large tent. We're working with farmers of every scale and size and type in Iowa and beyond. We value creativity, collaboration, and community. We hope to see viable farms now and for our future generations. We have a strong beginning farmer program, and we value stewardship and ecology of our Midwestern lands. And just a little bit to tie into why we're here today. So we are working on an on-farm research project with 2 sites in central Iowa. The project is titled Demonstrating Economic and Soil Health Benefits of Grazing Cover Crops. This is the project that Jeff was referencing about planting a 6-species cover crop mix and then grazing that and then taking soil health tests to assess the value of cover crops and the impact of animals on row crop fields. And with that, I want to introduce Alan Williams, who is our featured speaker today for the webinar. Alan's an adaptive grazing and grass-fed beef consultant who specializes in whole farm planning based on the concept of regenerative agriculture and regenerative grazing. So with that, I'd like to welcome Alan.
Okay, thank you, Jeff and Megan. Appreciate that very much, and welcome everybody to today's webinar. I look forward to being able to chat with each of you in our Q&A session at the end. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to go through the presentation, and then any questions that you have, we will try to address those in that final 30-minute session. So what we're going to talk about today is the integration of adaptive grazing and cover crops into row crop operations. And by doing that, we have found that we can produce demonstrable and very favorable results that allow farmers to be able to reduce input costs, to rebuild their soil health parameters, and to be able to realize greater net profitability. I'm going to give you today a number of case studies from farmers that we've been working with in different regions of the U.S. We are doing this now with the Pasture Project. We're doing this predominantly in the upper Midwest, concentrating on working with farmers in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But on a broader scale, I'm working with farmers and ranchers across the U.S., from east to west coast, north to south. We're also working with farmers and ranchers in Canada and in Mexico. So we have experience in all of those areas in looking at the impact of cover crop livestock integration. Now, to get started, I just want to talk about a couple of things that have been in the news here over the last several months. And it gives us a snapshot of where we are today in the U.S. in our farming economy. So what we find a few months ago, last fall, on the exact same day, and this was a Sunday, there were two articles that came out in major newspapers. One was printed in the USA Today newspaper, and it was an article about the Monsanto-Bayer merger. So they were interviewing farmers, predominantly farmers in Iowa, were the ones most featured in this particular article. And those farmers came back with two primary responses to the interviews for this article. One was that they were fearing further potential for price control by this continued consolidation within, this ag sector, but yet they were still hopeful, though, that the merger between Monsanto and Bayer would produce new genetically modified crops and chemicals that will continue to increase yields. So on one hand, the farmers were fearful of price control, but on the other hand, they were hopeful for new abilities or ways to be able to increase the yields in the row crops that they were growing. But yet, on the exact same Sunday, in another article published in the Houston Chronicle interviewing farmers around the United States, they found that farmers were complaining about the ability to not realize significant net margins because they had bumper yields last year in their row crops, particularly their corn and their beans. So the title of that article was "Bumper Yields Plows Farmers Under." Now, just about 3 weeks later, I was doing a 8-workshop series in the state of Nebraska, and the Omaha World-Herald had an article that came out that very week that I happened to be doing that workshop series, titled "More Crop, Less Cash." And that particular article detailed that U.S. farm economics were deteriorating, land values were falling, loan defaults were on the rise, but us farmers, once again, produced record yields of corn and beans for the year. However, farm income was down 42% since 2013. So we've got a little bit of a conundrum here. We keep striving for ever increasing yields in our crops, but at the same time, we're experiencing a deteriorating farm economy. And as I said earlier, I do a lot of work in Canada, and I just did a series of workshops in Manitoba a little more than a month ago up there, and I can tell you that farmers in Canada have the same concerns and the same issues that we're facing here in the US. So it's got to be more than just increasing yields, that helps us to be able to improve our farm economy. Okay, and Jeff, okay, there we go. All right, I lost control, regained control. Sorry about that. All right, so this was at a recent conference, this particular slide. This was work that was done in Argentina, but it very clearly demonstrates what happens when we go from livestock and pasture and grazing to row crop production. What you're seeing here on this slide is the loss of soil organic carbon with year after year continuous cropping. And we're looking at a continuous cropping system. That will be the bottom line that you see that appears to be sort of red or brown in color. And then they did a 6-year row crop rotation intermingled with a 2-year pasture rotation in between each 6 years, and then an every 4-year row crop pasture rotation. And what is very clear is that with a continuous cropping situation, we have continuous loss of soil organic carbon. And that matches up quite well with data that we have seen collected from farms across the US and Canada. However, when you introduce a pasture system into the rotation, you can see that we get a definitive spike in soil organic carbon during that pastured rotation time period, and we build carbon during that period. And then when we transition back into the row cropping, you can see that once again we start losing a lot of that soil organic carbon. Now, research recently published in the Journal of Ecology looking at urban farming allotments. And what we're talking about here are the little gardens that they have in urban and in cities that are located on vacant lots and things like that. And what we found was that those small plots of land that are being basically hand cultivated by these, quote, urban farmers actually on average contain 1/3 more organic carbon than our average farm soil across the US, and 25% more nitrogen. But even more, sort of surprising is that these urban allotment holders on their small acreage are producing between 4 and 11 times more food per acre than all of us as conventional farmers. So that should be sort of an indictment against us. What are we doing wrong that these folks, city folks basically, can produce a lot more food than us, to the tune of 4 to 11 times more per acre. So one of the things that we have found that produces the most rapid improvements in soil health parameters and productivity in being able to sock in, that soluble carbon, or what I call liquid carbon, into the soil, and be able to restore that plant micro pathway so that we have much more effective soil mineral utilization for the production of our crops, is the use of adaptive grazing. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about adaptive grazing, and you can access much more information and material on this from past webinars that we've had with the Pasture Project, as well as a number of my PowerPoint presentations that are posted here. So with adaptive grazing, it's just simply a method of grazing that we also sometimes refer to as flex grazing that allows the practitioner to address multiple goals and objectives, but it's not a routine or rigid system. Now, as farmers and ranchers, or as humans in general, we tend to like routines. We tend to like rigidity and systems where we repeat and do the same thing every day. But each of you that is a farmer or rancher that may be on this webinar, you understand that we're dealing with nature, we're dealing with biology. And biology is never routine and it's never rigid. And so we have to adapt or flex what we do to adjust to that and to allow us to work more with nature, with biology than against it. So it allows us to adapt rapidly to changing conditions. It's goal-oriented. It is predicated on stock density or pounds of livestock per acre and not stocking rate. And stocking rate is just simply number of head per acre or number of acres per head. It is highly dependent on management and flexibility and on frequent movement of the livestock and frequent rest of the previously grazed paddocks. What we're looking for before we go back to a previously grazed paddock is complete plant root system recovery. And it is highly reliant on temporary fencing technology. Now, we're very lucky in today's time and age that we have excellent temporary fencing technology. And on many different farms that we're working with today on introducing cover crop livestock integration, we're actually making even the perimeter fencing temporary, where we can easily put it down and take it back up, as well as the interior fencing being single strand polywire, ultimate temporary. We can use anything from plug-in energizers to solar panel energizers that are highly effective. And we can even make our water systems temporary, so that when you get ready to go back out into your fields, you have unimpeded turn rows. You're able to not have to work around fencing and water and planting your cash crop. And one thing that I want to emphasize, this last point here, compounding and cascading effects. Everything that we do in agriculture, whether we realize it or not, has what I call compounding and cascading effects. That means that every decision we make, every management practice we implement has these effects that ripple out. They impact our soil biology. They impact our soil structure. They impact our plant performance. They impact our mineral availability. They impact our livestock performance. And they ultimately impact us. So everything that we do has a compounding or cascading effect, either for the positive or for the negative. It's never neutral, ever. And we need to remember that. Every decision we make is either going to produce a negative impact or a positive impact. And of course, we're after compounding positive impacts. So if we look at adaptive grazing and we said it's all about stock density, what does stock density look like? Well, if we look at these 4 slides, we have 4 different examples of stock densities. The top left represents 250,000 pounds of beef cattle per acre. If we move to the right top, that's 100,000. Bottom left, 500,000 pounds per acre, and the bottom right, 1,000,000 pounds per acre. Now, we said that this is adaptive grazing, not a rigid routine or system. And because of that, I do some of these all of the time, but none of these every time, okay? So we do, I utilize all of these at different periods of the year and for different goals and objectives, but I don't do any of these particular stocking densities or other stocking densities every single time that I go out and graze a paddock. We use them to achieve, as I said, very specific goals and objectives. And in our Q&A session, we can talk a lot more about what those may be. So all we're trying to do in terms of rebuilding soil is to simulate nature. You know, like the wild herds of bison and other large ruminants used to do throughout North America and have done throughout the great grasslands and forested areas of the world. So we're after creating biomimicry and ecomimicry. But today, we no longer have the large unimpeded areas across North America and the large herds of wild ruminants, bison and elk and so forth, that used to roam and graze those areas. However, we have livestock, and we can utilize livestock through our management practices and using things like you see in this picture. These cattle are behind a single strand of electrified polywire with tread-in pigtail posts, easily controlled, and we can move them forward directly under our desired management practice to achieve the very targeted goals that we want to achieve. Now, if you want to learn a lot more, here's a series of short films that I recommend that you access. It's called the Soil Carbon Cowboy series. They're all between 6 minutes, and the longest one currently is 25 minutes, so very easy to watch. But you can just simply go to soilcarboncowboys.com to watch these films, and there's more films that'll be produced and are actually in final editing right now. So you'll be able to continue to follow this series, but it follows farmers and ranchers across North America and how they have implemented adaptive grazing and cover crop integration to be able to significantly alter the productivity of their farms and ranches and their net profitability. Additional resources include things that we have on the Pasture Project website, such as our grass-fed beef decision calculator, numerous PowerPoint presentations. We started a series of how-to videos that we'll be adding to. We have a couple of fencing how-to videos in there right now, and of course webinars like we're doing today. Now the next slide that you see is just a picture of multi-paddock construction for multiple daily moves. And you can see that everything is just single strand wire. We've got polywire on geared reels that is very easy to put down and reel back up. And in this series of paddocks, we can make multiple times a day moves with this set of cattle through these paddocks to get a high degree of trample, build a lot of soil organic matter in a short period of time, be able to significantly relieve soil compaction, improve soil aggregate layer and water infiltration rates, and of course apply a high level of fertility for any subsequent cash crop that's going to be moved across that piece of ground. Now, to do this in adaptive grazing, you need a good rig that allows you to be able to do this very effectively and efficiently. This is an example of my rig that we use on our farm, and I've just simply double decked a Polaris Ranger. In the bottom deck, I've subdivided it into 3 different sections where I keep the 3 different types of posts that I use for my temporary fencing. And up top, I keep my geared reels with all my polywire, my gate handles, those types of things. So it's very simple and easy. You can do any UTV like this to make your fencing highly effective. We also have numerous things that we can do with water. And in some of my PowerPoint presentations that are posted on the pastureproject.org website, you can see many different other slides that give you ideas about how to put in either permanent or temporary water systems. This system is simply an underground line with risers coming up every 300 to 400 feet and quick couplers on those risers that allow us to be able to very quickly attach a line and put in a water trough at any point along that line, and allows us to be able to effectively graze that area in between cash crops. Now, there's a couple of YouTube videos that I recommend you go to as well to show you how easy it is to move cattle We show you that in the Soil Carbon Cowboy series, but you can also follow Brad Dennis here in these short videos that show him moving 700 head in 15 minutes. So he's constructing the paddock and moving these cattle in just 15 minutes. So this is how quickly and efficiently you can do this on a day-to-day basis. And the question that I always like to present at workshops and conferences that I do is ask yourself, who is the employee? Is it you or is your livestock? You know, I'm going to submit to you, if you're spending all your time cutting, raking, baling hay in the summer and then feeding everything out in the winter, you know, you're more of the employee for your livestock. You're working for them rather than them working for you. But by moving towards more cover crop utilization and adaptive grazing integration and all of this, we turn that thing around and we make our cattle and our other livestock work for us as it should be. So now we're going to dive in to some case studies. And again, I'm purposefully giving you different regions of the country because I want you to understand that no matter where you are in North America or frankly the world, okay, because we have examples of this globally, but no matter where you are, no matter your soil type, no matter your growing season length, you can implement these practices and do them very, very effectively. So I'm going to give you examples of different regions in the U.S. this morning that have used this very effectively. So if we go to North Carolina, this is Russell Hedrick's farm, and on Russell's farm, he grows a number of different cash crops. This is a guy that didn't grow up farming. He got highly interested in it and started doing a lot of studying about cover crop livestock integration and crop rotations and different enterprises that he could integrate. And so a guy that didn't grow up farming today is one of the very best farmers in the United States and has multiple spinoff enterprises from his farm that has turned him into a very highly profitable operation. What you're looking at in this picture is you're looking at soybeans, obviously, planted into a rolled down cover crop following grazing during the cool season. So after the prior cash crop, he planted a extensive or very complex cover crop mix, a cocktail, cool season, grazed that several times during the winter months, and then let it grow up enough after the last graze before he went in to plant his cash crop, the soybeans for that year. And he did a roll down with no herbicide application ahead of the roll down, did a roll down and then drilled directly into that roll down. Now you can see here his beans have canopied over at this point, and as he pulls the beans back, you can see the mat created by the roll down cover crop that's still in existence. And so through all of this growing season, that mat has deterred weed growth, significantly suppressed any weed growth. It has protected his soil microbes and earthworm populations so that they could continue to work for him. And it has protected his soil moisture and has shielded his soil from heating up and causing loss of microbes and loss of soil moisture. And so last year, what he did with no post herbicide whatsoever, in this part of North Carolina, he averaged 86.5 bushels per acre. And this is an area that does very well on dryland beans to average 40 bushels per acre of bean production. And as you can see here, plenty of soil aggregate material. So the soil is aggregating very well due to his cover crop livestock integration. And also we have plenty of earthworms going to work for us to increase soil water infiltration, build new soil organic matter, and continue to help increase that aggregate layer. This is planting into a rolled down cover crop for corn production. And as you can see here, he's got a roller on the front of the tractor, and he's doing all of this in one pass. So he's rolling it down and planting into that roll down in the same pass. And here you see the corn coming up through the roll down cover crop. Again, excellent stand of corn coming right up through the roll down mat. And you can see excellent weed suppression. And once again, we're protecting soil moisture, protecting soil temperature, and those earthworms and microbes. This is an example of the difference in soil temperature when we have that roll down versus a typical field found in Russell's area. Here, where we had the roll down and these temperatures were taken at the same time on the same day, it was 77 degrees. And where we find the, the typical situation in his part of the world, it was 94 degrees on that same day, soil temperature. So a dramatic difference. This is harvesting his corn. You can see some of the cobs there. And on his corn, this was dryland corn. His county average yield is 120 bushels per acre for dryland corn, using cover crop livestock integration, rolling down and planting into the mat. He averaged 214 bushels per acre. His direct costs per bushel were 125, and on about 20 or so acres that he pulled out specifically to compete in the North Carolina dryland corn competition, he averaged 318 bushels per acre on that particular 20 acres. Another example in Tennessee, this was a long-term no-till farmer. On the left, you see his corn crop planted 2 weeks earlier versus what was planted on the right. And on the right, that was planted into a rolled-down cover crop. But on the left, even though this farmer had been doing long-term no-till, he had not been doing any cover crop integration. In this particular slide, you can see how the corn was planted into the rolled-down cover crop. So again, we've got a chevron roller mounted to the front of the tractor, followed up by the planter. And so once again, you can make this fairly economical by doing all of this in a single pass. So this is a look at the corn crop that was planted into the roll down. As you can see in that bottom middle picture, you can see the corn coming up very well through the mat. And again, you can see a temperature difference. And these temperatures were taken one on one side of that row that we saw in that first picture and one right on the other. So the temperature where we had the roll down, and again, the same day, the same time, the soil temperature was 79 degrees where we had the roll down, but 91 degrees just right across that little farm lane where there was no cover crop and no roll down. So again, across the road with no cover crop, no roll down, and no residue there on the soil, we had much higher evaporative loss of our soil moisture and much lower earthworm and soil microbe activity. So this is what he did. He planted an 8-seed cover crop mix. You can see what he planted listed there. And then rolled down that cover crop mix in early May. And the biomass that he planted into was 20,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. He planted using the roller, as you saw there, and a John Deere air seeder. He was fearful initially of that 20,000 pounds of standing biomass, but after doing the roll down and planting into it, and this is his direct statement, that he lost all fear of that biomass, and he now believes if he can get it on the ground, he can plant into it. And then that same year, after planting in early May, he received less than 5.5 inches of rain from planting until August. And he also went 55 plus days with ambient temperatures of 90 to 98 degrees. But yet you can see what happened. His cover crop field, where we rolled down the cover crop, yielded 215 bushels per acre, but just right across the road, the no-till field yielded just 160 bushels per acre. Now, the reason he planted 2 weeks later on the roll down was just simply waiting on the cover crop to achieve the desired degree of maturity to get a good kill from the crimp when he rolled it down. This is an excellent tool for you to use in designing potential cover crop mixes. You can go to greencoverseed.com and click on their Smart Mix Calculator. I'm sure there's a number of you on this call today that have used Green Cover Seed's tool, but it is the best tool on the market that we have right now as an interactive tool to be able to design, no matter what your zip code, no matter where you're located, you can type in your zip code into their Smart Mix 4 calculator, and you can design cover crop mixes to meet a number of different goals and objectives. They have gauges within this calculator that show you how well, with the addition of each different cultivar in that cover crop mix, that show you how well you're doing at achieving certain objectives, whether it be standing biomass, forage biomass for grazing, fixing nitrogen, reducing soil erosion, building soil organic matter, improving carbon to nitrogen ratio, whatever it may be. They have gauges that allow you to be able to achieve those objectives. And you can see the gauges along the top and along the side here that work just like a fuel or an oil gauge. This is free to use. So Green Cover Seed has made this free and available to anybody. You do not have to order your seed from them. You can use this for free, design your own mix, and then order your seed from whoever you want to. So that's just something that Keith Burns and Brian Burns at Green Cover Seed are just simply doing for the industry and for farming. Okay, another example in Illinois. This was in southern Illinois near El Dorado, but this was a trial. We started collecting baseline data from this farmer in the spring of 2014 and planted a complex cover crop into a standing corn crop. And this particular farmer's been doing corn after corn. Then we adaptively grazed the cover and employed quorum sensing technology, and then followed this with a cash crop again in 2015, collected data again after that cash crop. And this was in the summer of 2015 that these pictures were taken. In August, the air temperature on that day was 96 degrees. This was about 1,000 acres of corn. Everywhere that we went in that field, you could find earthworm castings, and you see those all around the brace roots of the corn there in the upper left picture. And we carried a spade with us and dug down into the soil in numerous places. And as you can see, evidence of earthworms everywhere throughout this entire 1,000 acres in the dead of August in a standing cornfield with an air temperature of 96 degrees. Earthworms everywhere. So that's one of the things that we can achieve when we start incorporating cover crops and livestock into our row cropping operations. So we can take a look at some of the data. We've got additional data to add to it now, but this is some of the initial data. You can see where we started in terms of soil pH, organic matter, cation exchange capacity, and then levels or in pounds per acre of PK, Cal, Mag, and all of that before his crop was planted in 2014. And then at the end of the 2015 cash crop season, after his crop was harvested, you see the increases in soil pH, organic matter, improvement in CEC, and improvement in these primary soil elements. And by the way, he was also able to cut his nitrogen applications 55%. 2014 corn yields pre-test, before we did anything, were 198 bushels per acre. This is dry land, no irrigation. 2015 corn yields were 214 bushels per acre, with the control being 185. In 2016, 232 bushels per acre, with the control being 202. And his winter grazing net profits, when you look at the incorporation of grazing stockers in the winter, he realized another $36 per acre net profit from the winter grazing that also allowed him to be able to show these year-over-year increases in corn yields. In Ohio, I've been working on a number of projects with Green Acres Research Farm, and they're looking at cover crop livestock integration into row cropping systems. And in this particular study, what they did was they looked at whole year cash crop grazing rotations. And so this was a warm season cover crop going in. 55 days after planting, with no starter fertilizer or no fertility applied whatsoever to this cover crop planting, they had 8,500 pounds of dry matter available per acre for grazing, just 55 days after planting. In a 120-day grazing period, these steers gained a little better than 3 pounds per head per day, which is obviously feedlot quality average daily gain. And by the time we got around to the second grazing, there was an average of 4,500 pounds of dry matter available per acre. So that's how much regrowth we had had. Now, to just give you a very good idea of what happened here, they planted an 18 species warm season cocktail mix, so a very aggressive cocktail mix. And in just 120 days, here's what happened. And I want you to note that. These are the results after just a 120-day grazing period. Soil organic matter increased from 3.6 to 4.4%, a gain of 0.8%. They added an additional 20,000 gallons per acre of water holding capacity. And over the 100 acres that they were using for this particular project, that's an additional 2 million gallons of water holding capacity in the soil achieved in just 120 days. Their soil nitrogen increased 58 pounds per acre. The mineral value increased $105 per acre. The microbial activity increased 44%. And the lucky graduate students that got to count earthworms figured out that there was an earthworm increase to greater than 130,000 earthworms per acre. George Lake in Pennsylvania. I want to show you what George was able to do. This is a guy that we're working with on some soil carbon projects and all of that. But about 25 years or so ago, he came out of the Marines and bought some land that was basically an abandoned sand quarry and went about turning it into highly productive soil, integrating cover crops and livestock. Now, when he first started trying to farm this abandoned sand quarry soil, he could only average, and it's all dry land, he could only average about 37 bushels of corn per acre with a high synthetic application. His corn yields now, again dry land, are in the 170s with no fertilization applied whatsoever, and he's growing non-GMO varieties. He's running about 600 head of cattle across this land as well, and about 100 sheep. He hosts about 15 tours a year. But I want to show you in this next slide what has happened in the last 20 years. So by integrating cover crops and adaptive grazing, he turned sand quarry soil from what you see on the right-hand side into what you see on the left-hand side. So a dramatic transformation in just 20 years. And we've seen much faster transformation over the last 5 years with the enhanced techniques that we now know about and are able to utilize. In North Dakota, I'm going to show you 4 different farms. And we're going to talk about them and then show you some data from these 4 farms. Farm number 1 is a certified organic farm that's very diverse in its cropping system. You can see what the farmer grows there: wheat, barley, oats, corn, sunflowers, peas, beans, edible beans, and alfalfa. He uses, of course, he's organic, so he uses natural organic fertilizers, but this farmer has not been integrating livestock or cover crops. Farm number 2, a no-till farm, but low diversity. He only rotates flax and spring wheat, uses a lot of anhydrous. Crop yields are average for the area. No livestock, no cover crop integration. Farm number 3, again, a no-till operation with medium diversity in its row crop rotations, but high use of synthetics. This particular farmer has not tilled for nearly 20 years now. His yields are high for his area, but he uses high inputs to get those high yields. But again, no livestock cover crop integration. Farm number 4 has been no-till since 1993. High diversity in terms of the cash crops that are grown, but this farm has been using a lot of complex cover crops and have fully integrated livestock onto their cropland in between the cash crops, grazing these complex cover crops. They not only are incorporating beef cattle into their grazing system on these cover crops, but they're also bringing in other species of livestock as well, such as pastured sheep, pork, laying hens, all of those types of things. And they also have a lot of beehives around the farm. They haven't used any synthetic fertilizer since '07. This farm, by the way, is Gabe Brown's farm near Bismarck. And all of these farms were located in very close proximity to each other. Now, the Haney test was performed on all of these farms, and you can see the difference here in terms of available N, P, and K, and water extractable organic carbon. So again, the first 3 farms, organic, no-till versus heavy use of cover crops and livestock integrated into the system in between cash crops, coupled with no-till, and you can see rather significant results in both elemental availability and organic carbon. And then finally today, I want to present to you, this is one of our producers that we're working with in the pasture project in our cover crop livestock integration project. And this is Grant and Dawn Brightcroots, located near Redwood Falls, Minnesota. Grant and Dawn were very conventional farmers and ranchers initially. And they, like a lot of people, they were struggling to make ends meet and so forth. And they started looking at serious integration of cover crops and then livestock onto those cover crops. So they produce corn, beans, and wheat, beef cattle, and then integrate those all in together. Now this, if you look at these pictures, Grant said that this is something that is becoming more and more common in their area, where in the fall and in the springtime, because of farmers, completely plowing or disking their fields in between their cash crops and leaving them bare and exposed throughout this period, we're seeing a lot more blowing of soil. And they said that this is something that, as I said earlier, is becoming more and more common in their region. And I'll have to admit to you, this is becoming more common across North America. I see this all the time now in my travels and our consulting. Now, when they first started out with cover crops, they were using single species covers. So they were only planting a single cultivar out there, a monoculture. And what they found were that only 1 out of 3 seasons were successful at all, and so the other 2 were a big failure. So the monoculture cover crops produced a lack of moisture. They weren't getting, very effective stands. There were just a lot of issues. It wasn't building their soil aggregate layer at any kind of rapid pace. They didn't see any kind of significant increase in their biology of the soil. and so forth. So it wasn't until they moved to much more complex mixes, and this was one of the first mixes that they started putting in. This was a mix they planted following a wheat harvest, and as you can see, they had 9 different varieties in here, but today they're going even more complex than that. But still, you know, we're getting at some complexity and diversity now by doing a 9-seed mix versus a monoculture. This is what that mix looked like after it was planted, after the wheat harvest and the straw was baled in middle of September. And then this is what it looked like October 30th, just 45 days later. So it was ready for grazing and had quite a bit of biomass to support multiple grazing rotations through that winter before they were ready to go back in with the next cash crop that next year. Now, what they have done, and a lot of farmers have done throughout the U.S. now, is figured out a way to be able to plant the cover crop mixes into standing crops. And so what Grant and Dawn did was they adapted a no-till drill, very cheaply, by the way, to interseed their cover crop into their standing corn. And we're going into the standing corn anywhere from the V4 to the V6 stage very effectively. There's different ways that you can retrofit planters to do this, or even build your own very cheaply. We've also gone in with highboys, retrofitted highboys. I've got pictures of that I'd be glad to share with you and can post on the Pasture Project website, where you can very effectively seed into a standing crop with a retrofitted highboy. So much so that we can cover as many as 500 acres a day planting that way. We've also aerially seeded into standing cash crops. This is what it looks like, the freshly seeded cover into standing corn. And then this is the cover crop response on November the 8th of that year after being planted into V5 to V6 stage corn. You can see that it has responded excellently once we got a dry down on the corn and the canopy disappeared and you had sunlight able to get down into it. We did root pits in the fields to look at how effectively these cover crops were at building soil aggregate, building mycorrhizal fungi populations, and putting roots far deeper into the ground. And what we found were live roots extending 3.5 feet and even deeper into the soil in March of 2016, and that was a result of the cover crop planting into the live standing crop or cash crop the year prior. Now here's a comparison side by side. The upper left is highly aggregated soil from the Bright Cruises field, and then right across the road from a neighbor's field that still use a lot of conventional tillage, no cover crop, no livestock integration. You can see a distinct difference. Very, very little soil aggregate in their neighbor's field compared to what Grant and Dawn are experiencing now in their fields. And here's what it looks like when we have significantly been able to increase our soil aggregate layer and extend that aggregate layer deeper into the soil. It improves everything from oxygenating our soil, improving the amount of aerobic microbes that are functional in that soil, and of course significantly improving soil water infiltration rates and water holding capacity. And in terms of dollars and cents, I'll go through this real quick so we can get to our questions. And again, all of this will be posted. But if you look at, you know, what this costs them and then what it returns to them, you know, basically when we look at the bottom line, their cover crop costs were about $37 per acre to put them in. Far cheaper to do the interseeding with the retrofitted planter than to fly on. You can see the cost comparison there, $26 compared to $66. The cost per pound of gain for their cattle during that winter grazing period was only 46 cents per pound. Bred heifers averaged gaining 3.4 pounds per day when they were grazing these cover crops, and their stocker calves averaged 2.4 pounds per day. Now again, if we take a look at their numbers, their expenses for planting their wheat, $20 per acre on the seeding costs, seed at $38 per acre, a total of $58 expense there. If we look at their return, they were producing $110 worth of feed for their cattle per acre, plus an additional $35 of wheat straw per acre. So a total of $145 in return for a net return of $87 per acre. But if we further factor in the delayed gains and savings from the following crop year, following a session of cover crop livestock integration, they further reduced their purchase fertilizer cost, $39 per acre. They reduced herbicide costs, $20 per acre, for an additional savings of $59 per acre, and added on to the net gain of $87. That gave us a total net gain of $146 per acre. And as Grant and Dawn like to say, one of the best rewards for all their efforts, clean water. And just real quickly, I want to go through this and then we'll open up to questions. There is a new soil testing option that is available to us that we're using quite heavily now through Quorum Labs out of El Dorado, Illinois. What they're doing, they're the first lab in North America to offer what's called a soil bioprofile test. I'm sure other labs will equip themselves and start offering this, but at this point, they're the only ones that are offering this right now, but they do a total DNA extraction. That reveals microbial that's supposed to be subgroups, pardon my typo, not subgroups, and subgroup biomass, and they do a complete elemental extraction, allowing us to make better decisions. If we go through this, I'm going to show you real quickly 3 different farms that were analyzed as comparisons. Farm A is a farm that just 5 years ago started introducing some cover crop integration. And you can see from the pie chart the various microbial subgroups that are present and to what degree they're present. Farm B, this is a farm that for the past 25 years has been extensively no-till. They've been using a lot of cover crop and livestock integration. You can see from the pie chart a lot more microbial subgroups present. And then Farm C is what I would call a very conventional farm, a lot of tillage, high use of synthetics, no livestock or cover crop integration. So if we make the comparison, Farm A and B, where we had some cover crop livestock integration, had far greater numbers of microbial subgroups, indicating far greater diversity in the microbial population, whereas Farm C, the very conventional operation, had a far lower number of microbial subgroups, with many of those subgroups being barely functional, as you can notice by the tiny slivers in that pie chart. And 2 subgroups were totally dominant in that factor. If we look at total biomass, we see again that Farm A and B had far greater total microbial biomass compared to Farm C. So here's what it's all about. It's about building for future generations so that our kids and grandkids have the same types of opportunities that we have, and hopefully far better than we have had in our lifetime. It's all about leaving it better for them. So Jeff, Megan, I'm going to open it up for questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Alan. One point of clarification, we were asked, will the slides be available after the webinar? Yes, they will be, hopefully by the end of the week, and I will send out that link. So for our first question, Alan, Tom Wind asks, was Green Acres a no-till operation or organic operation?
No-till.
Great. And Jean Schriefer asks, are there ever control areas where nothing different is done compared with the different cover crop mixes?
Yes, yes, absolutely. If you notice from the Illinois data, we had the controls, but we also have controls like Grant and Don Brightkreutz and all of those farmers that are participating with us in the Pasture Project, collaborative project. And by the way, PFI is a big collaborator in that project, folks. So we do have both the treated and control areas, and we will, at the end of this year, we will be summarizing all of that data for 3 years of doing this and following through on both the control and treated. And in many of these operations, we do also have control areas as well. So I would be happy to share that data with anybody that wants it, or even specially prepare some stuff to post on the Pasture Project website.
Thanks, Alan. 2 questions from Dylan Bruce. How did the grazing before rolled rye beans affect fertility input needs in the North Carolina example?
Significantly reduced fertility, whether it was beans or corn. He is using he's using no fertilizer input on the beans whatsoever, and very little fertilizer input right now on the corn. And his goal is this year to not have to apply any external fertilizer to the corn crop as well. But he's been able to significantly reduce fertilizer input needs due to the livestock impact on those cover crops.
Great. Also, at what point is it necessary to stop grazing if you want enough biomass for weed suppression?
Excellent point. And, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to examine, and again, this is going to be region by region, and depending on the type of spring you're having, in your particular area. But you're going to have to, stop the grazing typically about 30 days out from planning on rolling it down. Okay. But now keep in mind, and Megan, as you know, what we practice in adaptive grazing, we're never letting the cattle take it down to the ground. We're not cropping it close. So every time the livestock are removed, we're leaving at least 6 inches or greater of standing growth there so that we still have plenty of leaf and blade material for rapid regrowth. A lot of photosynthesis to occur and get rapid regrowth. So with that in mind, that we're not close cropping it, the regrowth occurs fairly rapidly, particularly if you still have plenty of soil moisture available. And usually you do in the spring in most areas of the country, and coupled with the fact that we're keeping that canopy by not cropping it close, we're protecting that moisture. So about 30 days ahead usually gets the job done.
Okay, we have a question from Jeff Farbman. Is there a plan to look at seeding fields with mycorrhizae?
We have done that with a number of people that we have worked with, and it certainly can help. Now, the deal is, though, you need to be aware of what is presently existing in that field. There's many different species of mycorrhizal fungi. And so we want to make sure that if we're going to seed anything, that we're seeding species that are going to be highly beneficial to us and are going to work well with the plant species that we're going to have in there. The mycorrhizal fungi feed off of the root exudates of the plants that are growing in the soil. And different plant species produce different types of root exudates with different chemical compositions. So we got to remember that. And so we can have different species of mycorrhizal fungi and subspecies associated with different plants. So yes, you can do that, but I will say as well, you can also significantly increase the mycorrhizal fungi just simply through keeping living roots in the ground year round. So after your cash crop, go right back in with a cover crop, or better yet, cover crop into the standing cash crop. So you've already got both of those roots in the ground recruiting mycorrhizal fungi. And then the action of the livestock on top of that further expands the total biomass of that mycorrhizal fungi.
Thanks. Next question from Brian Simon. What factors are you using to decide when to use very high density grazing versus pretty high versus high density grazing?
Excellent question. And there's a number of factors that we use. First and foremost are our desired goals and objectives, okay? And how many grazings we want to get on that cover crop. So in pertaining to that, the higher the stock density that you use, you know, when you go to what I call ultra high stock densities, 250,000, 500,000, 1 million pounds per acre, those require, you'll lay a lot of biomass on the ground in a hurry, a lot of trample, and you'll get a lot of manure and urine application. And you'll get a very thorough soil massage from that highly concentrated hoof action, okay? But that area grazed under ultra high stock density is going to require a significantly longer recovery period before you can graze it again. So in a typical cover crop, particularly a cool season cover crop season, if you go ultra high stock density, you're likely to only get a single grazing because of the recovery period that's going to be necessary. And at most, maybe 2 grazings. If you go lower stock densities, and those can be 40 to 50,000 or 100,000 or 150,000 pounds per acre, you can get more total grazings for that season. So that's one of the factors. Another factor that we have to obviously consider are soil moisture conditions. When that soil moisture is very high, you do not want to be pugging up the ground. So in that instance, you would either hold the cattle off of those sections, or you would graze it under much more relaxed densities. So graze it under lower densities. Now keep in mind, the lower the density, the less trample, the less manure and urine that you're applying in an even manner, and so forth. So there's trade-offs there when you do that, okay? So the second factor is soil moisture conditions, and the third factor that we consider is going to be total standing biomass. You know, I want enough standing biomass. I don't want to start my grazing when that cover is still pretty short, because even though my cattle can graze it, you know, they're going to graze it down tight. I'm going to lose protection of my soil, but I'm also going to not get the desired trample. That trample, that residue that they put on the ground, allows us to be able to build soil organic matter much more rapidly. And again, due to those compounding cascading effects that I talked about, when we get that trample down, we not only build more organic matter, but we create an atmosphere or the conditions that are conducive for greater earthworm populations, soil level insect populations, soil microbial populations. We're building soil aggregate layer more rapidly. We're protecting our soil moisture, on and on. So again, compounding, cascading effects that are very positive. So those are the 3 factors that I consider to be the most important: soil moisture conditions, amount of standing biomass, that is present, and your goals and objectives for that grazing season.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, we have a question from Tom Wind. He says, you showed a significant increase in percent organic matter over a 1-year period by using the cover crops and livestock. And he asked if we could show that slide again, and then asks, please describe that situation in a little more detail. He asks, is this a temporary increase in organic matter, and can this be done every year?
Okay, so the slide you have up, that's not a 1-year increase, okay? Keep in mind, this is a 1-year comparison, okay, between these 4 different farms that are all located, they're neighbors to each other, okay? So let's keep that in mind. You know, they're not in divergent places, they're neighbors. So the one farm was an organic farm, but used a lot of conventional tillage, no covers, no livestock. The next 2 were no-tills, but no cover, no livestock. And the last one, Gabe Brown's, you know, of course, a lot of no-till, cover crop, livestock integration, all of that for years. So keep in mind, you know, that this was a comparison done after years of practices on each of these farms. So this was a one point in time comparison, but you can see, and again, you can do this at any point in time that you want, and you'll still get very similar differences between these 4 farms here. But the water extractable organic carbon, what happens is, you know, carbon, particularly soluble carbon or the non-labile form, and again, what I call liquid carbon, that's readily available to fuel that plant microbe pathway, you know, you're going to build and lose, depending on your practices. And so if you're using a lot of tillage, you're going to lose carbon and you're going to have to build it back. You know, the more you move away from a lot of tillage, the more you'll be able to retain a lot of this carbon in the soil. But what we want is we actually want some carbon pulsing, okay? Where we have issues is where we don't get the carbon pulsing, where we're consistently losing soil carbon and degrading that soluble carbon. That's where we get into trouble. But where we can pulse and we can year after year and even within a year be able to build in soluble carbon that can then fuel the plant microbe pathway, and some of that will be lost again, but we're constantly building it and putting it back in. And over time, the cumulative effect is that we're building more than we're losing, and that's what we're after.
So, Alan, Tom Wind actually wanted you to elaborate on this slide that Jeff pulled up.
Okay. Okay. All right, so on this slide, yes, so on this one, we see now the 2014 data was the spring of that year prior to planting that crop. Soil organic matter was measured across that 1,000 acres at 2.4%. And then after going in and planting a cover crop into that 2014 standing crop, grazing that cover crop, I believe, and I'll have to go back and look at my files, but I believe we were able to get 4, it was either 4 or 5 grazings on that standing cool season cover, and then going back in with the next corn crop. So again, remember, this was corn on corn, going back in with the next corn crop, you know, that in 2015, spring of that year. And then after harvest of that crop, the soil organic matter had increased 1.1%. And so, yes, it was due to the fact that we had a lot of biomass that 2015 corn crop was planted into, and we had had a lot of trample of forage biomass, cover crop biomass, through that whole winter period from the grazings, coupled with high levels of manure and urine applications. And you can actually apply, I've got data, and it's probably on some of my former PowerPoints that are posted on the Pasture Project website, but if not, I'll make sure we get it posted, but I have slides that show you just how much manure and urine we can accumulate and accrue in the soil in a very short period of time with higher stock density grazing. And if I didn't answer that question, ask again, and I'll do a better job.
Are there any other questions for Alan? Okay, we just had one come in from Brian Simon. Do you think that grazing annual cover crops have advantages or benefits over grazing perennial pasture?
Okay, I guess I have to fully understand the question, but is the question, are we trying to compare land that stays in perennial pasture and is never cropped to land that is pulsed between cash crops and cover crops and grazing? Is that the question?
I haven't heard clarification from Brian, but just to state it again, do you think that grazing annual cover crops have advantages or benefits over grazing perennial pastures?
Okay, I'll answer it this way until we hear back from Brian if I need to clarify further. But I'll answer it this way. Perennial pastures are always going to give you greater benefits over time than in terms of just total soil health parameter, all the soil health parameters, everything that we can name. Okay, we're going to get more total accrued benefits over time grazing perennial pastures. But again, Megan, it's got to be using the proper grazing methodology and encouraging diversity and complexity in those perennial pastures. Okay, so if we're talking about a conventional pasture that has a monoculture or near monoculture forage crop in it, and they're grazing very conventionally in a continuous or set stock method, well, you know what? We're actually degrading that soil. Okay, not as badly as conventional tillage with a cash crop operation, but we're still degrading that soil, and we still see loss of soil microbial population. We still see loss of diversity. We still see loss of soil aggregate layer and water infiltration and all of that. And we know because we've monitored and measured that. But if we're grazing perennial pastures where we've encouraged highly diverse and complex perennial mixes, and we're using adaptive grazing, so we're pulsing our grazing across and rotating, very, very frequently across the landscape there, it's definitely going to be better than the cash crop, cover crop, livestock rotation. But we know we've got to do cash crops. We've got to produce some cash crops. So if we're going to do that, and we have to, then, by far the biggest benefits are to put in complex cover crops, not monoculture cover crops, and graze those with livestock. Now, one other thing, though, Megan, is that we're now, a lot of the farmers that we started working with a few years ago on this, it's working so well for them that they've now transitioned into full year cash crop grazing cycles. So they're taking different sections of their farms and rotating through those sections. So for instance, we may come out with a cash crop, a corn crop, say, last fall, go in with a cool season cover, graze it, follow that with a warm season cover, graze it, followed by another cool season and graze it. So we've got 3 cover crop grazing impacts before we go back in with the next cash crop. So we're laying out an entire year and doing different portions of the farm that way in that rotation different years. We're finding very, very significant results in terms of positive net margins and significant decreases in input cost, and they're making money on their livestock in the meantime. So that's another option that has worked very well.
Thanks, Alan. Brian said you answered his question.
Good, thank you.
So Tom Wind has another question. He says he's grazing annual cover crops, spring and summer mixes, no cash crop. He used a 12-way mix of spring and summer annuals, and he's also grazing permanent pasture with no interseeded summer annuals. Which scenario will give the most organic matter increase, assuming high density mob grazing for both scenarios?
The perennial. You know, again, all right, let me answer that two ways, okay? And that was Tom that asked that question, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, Tom, let me answer it two ways, okay? First of all, it depends on your starting point, okay? Now, on conventionally farmed row crop ground, you know, a lot of times you're starting at a lower point in terms of total organic carbon, soluble carbon, and organic matter, you know, because it's been farmed out, tilled out essentially. And your soil aggregate layer is going to be lower in that farm ground and all of that. So you're going to see the quickest or fastest upfront increases there, okay? Because you have a lower starting point. And the complexity of the cover crops and the livestock will create very rapid results there. However, over the long term, you're definitely going to see greater accrual in the perennial pasture, again, when you manage it for complexity and diversity in the plant species out there, and you're using the adaptive grazing with the frequent rotations, you will definitely see the greater accrual over time there than you will in the cash crop, cover crop situation.
Well, Alan, Tom says that's exactly what he wanted to hear.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.